Здрасте, Наталья Степанівна. Здрасте, Игорь Иванович.
Здравствуйте.
Доброго дня.
Доброго дня. А тебя не видно, да. Надо проверить просто.
А вже видно.
Доброго дня, шановні учасники. Перед початком роботи давайте переконаємося, що...
Good afternoon, good morning, dear participants. Before we begin, let's make sure that you have picked your language channel.
Everybody of us has chosen the comfortable language to participate at the webinar. Будь ласка, внизу праворуч ви можете побачити кнопку «Глобус». Натисніть
At the bottom, you can see this globe icon. Please kindly pick your desired language channel, Ukrainian or English. This is going to be a bilingual event and simultaneous translation will be provided.
Press it and choose comfortable language, English or Ukrainian. A simultaneous interpretation will be provided, and we are having a two-language webinar today. Отже, я сподіваюся, що всі обрали зручну мову.
Okay, I hope you are done by now choosing your preferred language. My dear participants, we're happy to welcome you at today's online event, Men and Women in Leadership Positions at Legal Entities, organized by the State Statistics Office of Ukraine in partnership with the UN Development Program in Ukraine and other partners. This event is brought to you as part of an Open Government Week that has begun in Ukraine and partners of international partnership, and it began on the 17th of May and will continue throughout the week. This event comes as part of the project for promoting civil society development, which is being delivered with the financial support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Denmark. The role of gender equality in sustainable development expressed itself through our goal number 5, gender equality. But this particular theme is a pervasive topic throughout the 17 objectives without securing equal rights for both women and men and girls and women. It's impossible to achieve sustainable development objectives. Ukraine is experiencing positive transformations as we see increasingly more politicians among women across government institutions. Women are increasingly proving that they are capable of achieving success and harnessing their potential in all areas of life. At today's webinar, we are going to listen to a presentation of the results of cooperation between the organizations who have contributed to this webinar and the analytical product entitled Men and Women in Leadership Positions Across Legal Entities. We will talk about modern gender-related challenges, and we will gain an insight into the quintessence of gender statistics on a global scale. And also we will take a look at some of the statistical tools that help integrate non-discrimination principles into Ukraine's society. I'm happy to hand over to the President of the State Statistics Office of Ukraine, Igor Vernam. Thank you. I hope that Ms. Stefania Yurcheva will be the first to take the floor to welcome the audience. She's been spearheading this effort in Ukraine for some years now, and this would have been maybe a very appropriate gesture. And during this webinar that is dedicated to the topic of gender equality, it would have been appropriate for Ms. Defina to take the floor first, just to go over all this work that the UNDP has done in Ukraine, and in particular in relation not only in promoting sustainable development goals and in supporting sustainable development objectives, but also by exploring the gender equality dimension of that. And if you don't mind, I'll be happy to hand over to Ms. Defina, and then I will rejoin and give my word of welcome. Ms. Defina, over to you. I'll be very happy to listen to your welcoming remarks, and I'm most honored to yield to you the privilege of opening our event.
Mr. Igor, thank you so much indeed. Your gesture is really touching and moving and much appreciated. Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear participants, on behalf of United Nations Development Program, I'm truly pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on women and men in the leadership of legal entities. I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Igor, to the State Statistics Service of Ukraine for the fruitful cooperation we have. UNDP and State Statistics are working together on many topical issues related to the reform of official statistics in Ukraine. One of the UNDP-supported initiatives is being implemented in partnership with Vox Ukraine. The project is aimed at enhancing the capacity of the State Statistics Service of Ukraine to support evidence-based policymaking and academic research by providing relevant data. An important component of this project focuses on developing an analytical framework for dissemination of entrepreneurship statistics by gender. Ensuring access to gender disaggregated data to citizens, civil society institutions, academia, and all interested parties is also identified as one of the commitments within 2021-2022 implementation plan of the Open Government Initiative. Gender equality is a fundamental human right. Women and men, girls and boys should enjoy equal rights and opportunities. This includes equal access to healthcare, education, income, justice, and legal aid. Promoting women's inclusion and empowerment are great multipliers of development progress and achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Gender equality and women's empowerment is the 5th of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and is integral to all dimensions of inclusive and sustainable development. It is an end in itself and the means to achieve all the other global goals. As we know so well, gender equality is not only the right thing to do, it is widely documented that it is also the smart thing to do. To invest in girls' education and women's economic empowerment, to accelerate sustainable and equitable economic growth. Basic arithmetic tells us that if all members of society are equally empowered to contribute, the sum of their efforts will be much greater than if whole groups like women do not enjoy equal opportunities. The more people contribute to society's welfare, the richer and more prosperous the society is. However, despite the global recognition of the importance of gender equality, the data shows that women are underrepresented at all levels of decision-making worldwide, and the achievement of gender parity in political life is far off. Today, we will present to you the key results of the most recent research, Women and Men in Leadership Positions in Ukraine, which analyzes open data from the business register. This research is a crucial step in collating sex disaggregated data in Ukraine and will be instrumental for developing appropriate support infrastructure for women entrepreneurs. The data is important for measuring the success of our efforts. We are confident that the results of the research will be useful for governmental and non-governmental stakeholders who are working on addressing the root causes of systemic gender barriers, discrimination, and violence against women and girls in Ukraine, and advancing gender equality across the society. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, reaching SDG 5 and the ambitious goal of gender equality requires a whole of society and whole of government approach. UNDP is strongly committed to further advance this agenda and support Ukraine's efforts towards building forward better and enhancing country's resilience and prosperity. We are looking to continuing the collaboration with you around advancing gender equality and women's empowerment in Ukraine. I thank you.
Щиро дякуємо вам, ваше високоповажносте.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And I would also like to extend our appreciation to the UNDP and being the flagship of this very important work. And we would like to thank you for your efforts in enhancing capacity of Ukraine's national statistics. And now over to the head of the State Statistics Service of Ukraine. Thank you. I apologize for this beginning of a webinar being a little jumbled up, but I look forward to this continuing as a more of an informal webinar. I look forward to setting the right tone for a discussion. I look forward to a discussion because this is a very interesting research project that is going to be presented to you this morning. In fact, it measures the percentage of women in positions of leadership. And I would like to assure you that all of you, that the State Statistics Service of Ukraine remains committed to doing its utmost in promoting the expansion of the statistical database with statistics segregated by gender. As Ms. Defina pointed out, it is really crucial for us. And it certainly is for Ukraine as a country and from a human rights perspective, but it's also very crucial to provide equal rights and opportunities to men and women in society. And this is of paramount importance. But I would also like to congratulate everyone on the International Vyshyvanka Day, Ukraine's traditional embroidered shirt day. And I would like to join in everyone celebrating this day. I'm wearing the colors of my hometown where I was born. And my daughter hand embroidered the shirt that I'm wearing today. Ukraine is strong because this has this rich historical heritage. It is strong that it has preserved it through the ages. But this shirt was embroidered by a girl. And this is why we are now breaking down those stereotypes that it's not just housekeeping, it's not housework that women are good for. It's also leadership. It's leading small and large organizations. We look forward to finding out about the role of women, not only across large legal entities, but also this research project tackles the important issue of how women have performed as sole proprietors, as business owners. I wouldn't like to take up too much of your time. I would like to leave more time for questions and answers, and in particular for our distinguished speakers. I would like to thank you, the UNDP and Ms. Yircheva for all the work that has been invested by UNDP to support Ukraine's national statistics and sustainable development objectives, in particular with a major focus on gender equality. I would also like to extend my appreciation to Vox Ukraine for their principled position, for their admirable research capacity, for the work that they've done, which I've always found to be very relevant and insightful and conducive to promoting this important discussion going forward. I'd like to thank everyone, all our partners, and I would like to invite everyone to begin this webinar. I would like to wish you a very successful and useful discussion. Thank you for your attention. Congrats on Vyshyvanka Day. Thank you, Igor Yevgenyevich. Now, without further ado, let's get straight to our useful discussions and constructive dialogue that are coming up. Among those crucial achievements in Ukraine is that this country now has enacted a law that celebrates equal rights of men and women. And 2005, the Cabinet Minister of Ukraine passed a resolution to institute gender equality monitoring. The State Statistics Service of Ukraine is strongly committed to mainstreaming gender equality dimensions, and there is a chapter entitled Gender Equality where we share a lot of information on this particular subject and on and publications and lots of interesting material. The State Statistics Service is also introducing innovations, and I'm happy to now hand over to Ms. Natalia Vlasenko, who serves as an advisor to the State Statistics Service of Ukraine, who's going to talk to us about the new gender dimension in statistical records. Over to you. Good morning, dear colleagues. I'm happy to welcome everyone in attendance. I would like to ask our technical support to bring up my slides. Thank you. This topic is not technically new to the extent that our social reform center that operates with support with several international organizations, has done quite some research into this. We are quite aware of the situation, and it started back in 2015 or 16, and we started this work along these lines. Just as Elena mentioned, we have a dedicated page on our website, Gender Equality. You can see this icon, the red one. Wherever you see this icon, you can click on it and you will get access to all appropriate information. But this topic is men and women in leadership positions in Ukraine. What I would like to indicate that Ukraine's national statistics authorities use a variety of data sources. The primary data source is public statistical observations, census, various individual statistical surveys that are conducted with frequencies once in 5 or 10 years. And in terms of collecting stats from companies, we use administrative data and statistical returns as filed by companies. As you can gather from our website, in 2021, state statistics authorities are working on 84 statistical observations. 19 of those observations contain information or gender disaggregated statistics. And this is nearly 20%. It's 1 in 5 projects have a gender disaggregation dimension. Regarding administrative data, this is a new wave or a new deal in terms of our cooperation with various ministries and government authorities under our memoranda of understanding to retrieve administrative data, which we then process and turn into statistics. One new item is implementing gender disaggregation across statistical units. This particular area is overseen by Irina Zhuk, who is our deputy chairman, who unfortunately is not with us at this seminar. I would like to thank her for the work that she's done. I would also like to thank our department director and some part of this department of statistical infrastructure, whose picture you can see in front of you, who are working on implementing the gender dimension into our statistical registers. And these are the people who've made this important work possible. And we've got Igor and Rina and all other people who've contributed. Let's move on. Now, what we have done as part of this statistical observation of this survey, we are working under methodologies that are properly enacted by the chairman of the State Statistical Service of Ukraine. They receive the prior clearance of various relevant commissions, and then they are signed into policy. At this point, amendments have been approved to the Register of Statistical Units, and relevant amendments have been made to the methodology of building statistical units using a gender dimension. And relevant amendments have been made policies have been enacted as part of the 2022 draft state statistical survey plan. Now, as regards this gender dimension for men and women in leadership positions, those are the various articles that need amending on company registration, articles 1, 5, 18, 19 of the Gender Equality Act of Ukraine. There's work underway to mainstream the gender dimension as part of the state statistical survey entitled Register Statistical Units. And as part of this register, gender attributes have been implemented. It's 1 for men, 2 for women. If unknown, then 3 is the value. In order to build those attributes, we use various statistical sources and the information data bank for population statistics, and also data from the International Institute of Ukraine for Slavic names. In terms of the gender balance, men versus women, this is being done in automatic mode. If these algorithms fail to establish whether the system is confronted with a man or a woman, then data is populated manually. Now, as regards this particular methodology, it envisages collecting data under this table that is posted on the website of the State Statistics Service of Ukraine. And it will kick into life beginning 2022. In 2020, however, the number of registered legal entities with the gender dimension populated was already a certain level. Then a certain part of those legal entities had their management positions gender desegregated. And we will be working to promote this gender mainstreaming. Now, in terms of, we are also looking at newly registered sole proprietorships with the gender dimension already implemented. The source of using data for building this public statistical survey, this comes from statistics provided by the Ministry of Justice of Ukraine, and these data items are shared on a daily basis in electronic form using the single state register as part of the protocol of exchanging data between those various registers and information systems owned by the State Statistics Service of Ukraine. So the data that we obtain from the Ministry of Justice provides a data base for building the register of statistical units. It's made up of 2. It is the statistical register of sole proprietorships and the statistical register of legal entities, of which EDRPOU is part. Based on the data obtained and based on our methodologies that I briefly introduced to you, which are going to be enacted shortly, what we've made some calculations to measure the number of legal entities headed by women. Those are companies. What we've done the same for registered companies, and we came up with over 3,000 entries. If we were to club together legal entities and sole proprietorships, those are registered companies on file with the Ministry of Justice that are properly licensed to operate. This breakdown is shown on the map in front of you. As you can gather from this table, the share of women varies with the province. In Kherson, Donetsk, Volyn, and Vinnytsia, we have the highest numbers for those provinces. It's anywhere between 30 and 32%. This is followed by the next stratum, including enterprises shown in purple, and this is where the highest share of women is 30%. The third stratum is Khmelnytsky, Rivnitsky, Mykolaiv, Chernometsky, Kharkiv, Sumy, shown in lighter color, and the bottom of this chart is Lviv, Ternopil, Kiev city, and Greater Kiev, the province around Kiev. Now, as regards the share of women sole proprietors headed by women, or sole proprietors have more relevance for this gender dimension, and there's a larger number of women. However, we have a very large number of those sole proprietors. It's 1.8 million. And unfortunately, many of those sole traders are dormant, not doing any actual operations, but they remain registered all the same, and they count in sole proprietorship statistics. Now, moving on to the next slide. According to our calculations, as regards the number of legal entities per se whose CEOs are women by the region, that's what we showed on the previous slide is 29%, and nationally, and based on the registered statistical units, we have calculated the share of active enterprises among those registered. As you can see, out of the 1.4 million on register, those economically active are as few as a little shy of 700,000, and that's around 50%. And this holds true of sole proprietorships too. In terms of a regional breakdown, this is quite a large gap, with the sole exception of Donetsk province, more or less the Lugansk province. Those numbers are quite close, but in other parts of Ukraine, it's quite a large gap. That's why we think it would be appropriate to only include economically active enterprises headed by women as their chief executive officers. Yes, I would like to conclude by indicating that we have been able to identify the stratum of enterprises that led by women, and this gives us a good idea of our general universe of data. And we have quite a large number of attributes that characterize enterprise from various dimensions. We have sales, for instance, measured in thousands of hryvnias. We have average headcount as of the beginning of this research period. We have net sales from the sale of goods and services, and those are those values, the numbers that were reported by legal entities. We can also draw the income data from statistical returns in order to determine the proportion of enterprises that are actually operating. And beginning 2022, that we will be calculating the share of women across active enterprises. And this is how we're going to approach this, both in terms of the number of women they employ and the number of female leaders. That thank you for your attention. This just a very brief walk through the work that we've done. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. Dear participants, I would like to remind you to use our questions and answers functionality on Zoom, also on our Facebook page. Feel free to ask any questions, and we will take your questions straight to the panelists. Now I'm happy to hand over for a presentation of the findings of the study, Men and Women and Leadership Positions Across Legal Entities, Ms. Tatiana Tichuk, who is the leader of the project of Vox Ukraine. Ms. Tichuk is also the chairperson of the expert council, and she's been very prominently contributing to our major initiatives. I would like to thank the State Statistics Service of Ukraine for inviting us to contribute. It's always a pleasure to work with you in all your endeavors and initiatives. What I would like to indicate is this particular area of work is a way, an opportunity to look at men versus women at legal entities. And we've been particularly excited about contributing to this one because the State Statistics Office launched this work, and it opens up opportunities to enable users to gain a better insight into the conduct of business by men versus women. Just as Natalia demonstrated, this is only the start, because we can unfold this and we can implement this classification across various structural surveys and observations to try and gain a deeper and more detailed insight into the kinds of data items that companies should report in order to measure gender balance. We can look at sales by volume, we can look at employment, as we've done as part of this pilot computation. This is only the first step on a very long road. But owing to StateStat, the State Statistics Office of Ukraine, for their work to implement this classification, we can then capitalize on it as we conceive and deliver more surveys and statistical observations. What we have been particularly interested in is that we had a chance to verify some of the stereotypes that continue to linger on about some trades being male versus female professions. And these stereotypes have evolved over the centuries under the influence of various factors. And in particular, before 2017, the law imposed restrictions on women's employment in certain professions. And that outdated law is no more, but what it's a great achievement. But these stereotypes are really dying very hard. And this now we have more sort of specialization, and in some areas we are seeing less of a balance, in particular when it comes to positions of leadership. Now, we have identified those particular professions, daycare for children, elementary schools, secondary schools. So we have a markedly more pronounced share of women represented in those professions, and the same applies to tour agents, beauty salons, and accounting and auditing. continue to have more women in the leadership of those organizations. And what was quite insightful, companies selling books. It's something like 70% of those businesses are led by women. At the same time, there are certain professions where we have seen a very small proportion of women in leadership, with men taking up over 90%. In metallurgy and steel production, in heavy industries, in and pipeline operation, in hunting, where as few as 4% of hunting enterprises are run by women. And you can see for yourselves on this slide. We were also interested in looking at a regional breakdown, and our map is slightly different from the one that Natalia showed, because we also worked with active company data that the State Statistics Service of Ukraine kindly shared with us. As you can see, it's not that there are any geographical differences but there are some regions, in particular Kiev city, where there's a larger proportion of women in positions of leadership, and some parts of the country, mostly in the east rather than the west of Ukraine. Now, in terms of, we also looked at whether or not women, the share of women in leadership varies with the size of company. Actually, we proceeded from a hypothesis that in many industries, women tend to enter the market at a later point. So they will be not as well represented in the leadership of large companies, but they will claim a larger share in the leadership of smaller companies. And this is actually corroborated by the data that Natalia shared with us, that indeed this number tends to be so much higher across sole traders. While at small companies, women can take up to 30%, large companies, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 16%. And in terms of where the data comes from, and in particular, based on the industries that are such that women increasingly take up a larger proportion of leadership positions, that it's not very frequent that we come across large companies run by women, with the exception of schools or beauty salons, but mostly by size, those tend to be small and medium-sized enterprises. And however, when it comes to casting iron, for instance, or producing steel, those works are mainly run by men. And this it actually intuitively makes sense. But at the same time, we wanted to look at whether or not any regional variances exist in how well women are represented across large versus small companies. And those variances do exist. We were not able, it's not that we were able to pinpoint a certain province or part of the country that, okay, the West has this profile versus the East that has a different profile. At the same time, there are some provinces where the gap in the share of men versus women across large versus small companies may not be that large, Lviv, Mykolaiv, but in some parts of Ukraine, near Ternopil and Lviv, and Ternopil province, only 7% of those large companies are run by women, as opposed to 25% of small, medium-sized enterprises run by women in the same provinces. It's actually an interesting and exciting topic to research. It's good, and we really welcome the State Statistics Service of Ukraine's increased attention to this particular thrust of research, that indeed this is an interesting and useful project that will help us home in on more detailed insights in our employment numbers. Now, another insightful thrust is to look at large metropolitan areas versus smaller cities and towns and villages. And actually it corroborated our initial assumption that big cities tend to have slightly more women in the leadership of companies, at average and large companies. At medium-sized companies, women representation is actually higher in smaller communities compared to large metropolitan areas. But that's actually, it's not a very pronounced difference. It's not statistically significant, if you will. And we need to pay closer attention and focus more research on gaining a better insight into this. We've been looking at some of the primary or major industries and the gaps that exist between provinces. Now, by and large, the variances are not very major, but if we look at public administration, we may have quite significant variances in smaller communities. We may have a larger proportion of women employed in leadership positions at their local municipalities compared to Kiev city. That's what we wanted to share with you. Let me now hand over to the next speaker. Thank you, Tatiana. It's a very interesting presentation and very insightful research. I would like to now hand over to the next speaker, who is an international speaker. We would like to extend our appreciation to the UN Economic Commission for Europe for their valuable contribution to mainstreaming gender equality and building statistical capacity. I'm happy to hand over to Ms. Kristen Jeffers, who's going to speak about gender statistics at UNEC. Over to you, Ms. Kristen.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I hope you can see my screen. I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to participate in this webinar, and to the interpreter to allow those of us who do not speak Ukrainian to participate. So good morning and thank you very much. My name is Kristen Jeffers and I work as a statistician at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which is one of 5 regional commissions of the United Nations that works to facilitate international cooperation and promotes sustainable development across our member states. Gender statistics at UNECE is organized around 4 main areas of work. The first is methodological work to develop guidelines and recommendations on the collection, production, and dissemination of gender relevant data. And our work in this area is guided by the Conference of European Statisticians Gender Statistics Steering Group, which is made up of representatives from 10 countries and 5 international organizations. We also engage in statistical capacity building activities to support the integration of a gender perspective into national statistical systems and to support the implementation of guidelines and recommendations around gender statistics. At UNECE, we maintain 2 statistical databases, that provide free and easy access to high quality and comparable data across countries. And we also support the exchange of experience and best practices through expert meetings and workshops of gender statistics focal points. So I'll say a bit more about each of these areas of work, trying to highlight the elements of our work that are most relevant to today's conversation on women and men in leadership positions. UNECE serves as secretariat to expert task forces engaged in methodological work in emerging topics and new developments in official statistics. Since 2010, these task forces have produced practical guidance and recommendations for producers of gender statistics. The topics covered in this methodological work are determined according to the needs of the national statistical offices in the region. So we like to say that our work is demand driven. We work on the areas of statistics that have been identified as priorities by the country representatives participating in our steering group, and then also by the country representatives who participate in our expert groups and workshops. So in 2010, the first UNECE task force on gender statistics produced the publication Developing Gender Statistics, a Practical Tool. And this is really a comprehensive manual on the production and use of gender statistics. And I'll just note that this manual includes sections on the structure and characteristics of the labor force through a gender perspective, and also entrepreneurship. Since the publication of this manual, ECE task forces have carried out methodological work in several areas of gender statistics and published guidance around the harmonization of time use surveys, which you all know is an important data source in gender statistics, gender equality indicators, communicating gender statistics, and measuring intra-household power in decision-making. And these publications are available for download from the UNECE website at the URL you can see at the bottom of this slide. In addition to publishing guidance to support national statistical offices in the production and dissemination of gender statistics, UNECE also provides training through national and regional workshops. Obviously, in the current environment, these meetings and workshops have been online, but we hope to return to in-person workshops in the coming years. UNECE has also produced a toolkit of training materials to support gender statistics focal points in delivering their own training in gender statistics. So the toolkit includes PowerPoint presentations, hand-on exercises, summary handouts, and sample agendas. And these resources are available in English and Russian. And the toolkit includes modules on measuring work and economic activity, and also on power and decision-making in society. A number of training videos related to gender statistics are also available on the UNECE website. These videos cover topics like the gender pay gap, incorporating gender into labor statistics, gender entrepreneurship and access to finance, and gender and decision-making. And these videos are available in English and in Russian. At the moment, we have 3 initiatives in gender statistics that I'd like to tell you a bit more about. So at this stage, I think it's clear to all of us that the social and economic impacts of COVID-19 will be long-lasting, and that also gender equality issues have attracted attention throughout this crisis. And that we really believe that there's a renewed demand for gender statistics that will persist long after the immediate effects of the crisis have been dealt with. So with this perspective in mind, the UNECE Gender Steering Group has initiated work to develop guidance for national statistical offices around a minimum set of survey questions that could be used to capture not only the immediate effects of the pandemic, but also the longer lasting consequences of the crisis. So the steering group is working to develop guidance in 5 key areas: work, both paid and unpaid work, economic security, health, domestic violence, and access to ICT resources, or what's also known as the gender digital divide. We also are engaged in an initiative with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development around measuring gender in trade. Trade and gender equality are linked in many ways. Trade interacts with the division of labor, income distribution, social economic well-being, and the agency of women and men. And trade policies have important redistributive effects within the economy, which can magnify or reduce existing disparities, such as gender inequality. So this initiative with UNCTAD aims to work with national statistical offices to enhance the technical capacity to collate data and statistics and formulate plans to improve the availability of data needed for gender responsive trade policies. And then lastly, in 2019, the Conference of European Statisticians established a task team on measuring gender identity to monitor developments related to the measurement of gender identity and to develop a repository of research for countries to consult if they begin to work in this area. So the task team is collecting information related to terminology, the legal context, the development of survey and census questions and statistical standards, and the dissemination of data on this topic. UNECE maintains 2 statistical databases. Since 2003, UNECE has maintained the statistical database that provides high quality, comparable country level data on the economy, transport, forestry, development, and population and gender. And data for all 56 UNECE countries are available across most of these domains in the database. And for many indicators, we have observations from as early as 1980. And for most indicators beginning in the year 2000, there are annual data available. And the statistical database interface is available in both English and Russian. And it allows data users to make customized tables and charts. And you can see on the slide here that there are many indicators available in the database related to the representation of women and men in different leadership positions. But there are also sex disaggregated data on labor force participation, employment, and there's also data on the gender pay gap included in the statistical database. And to maintain this database, we rely on national statistical offices to provide us with annual updates. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the State Statistics Service of Ukraine for supplying data to our database and for participating in our very recent gender data collection. In March of 2020, so just last year, we also launched the Sdg Dashboard and Database, which brings together data for 80 SDG indicators that are particularly relevant for the ECE region. So the database highlights the indicators that are especially relevant for our region. And the database includes many SDG indicators on gender equality, including indicators on women and men in government and managerial positions. You can see those indicators listed at the bottom of the slide. But many indicators for other goals are also include sex disaggregations. And like the ECE statistical database, this interface is also available in English and Russian, and it allows users to generate customized charts and maps, and also to download data files for more in-depth analysis. So this is an example of a chart that I generated on the Sdg dashboard. So this chart shows data for indicator 5.5.2, the proportion of women in managerial countries. And this is, sorry, the proportion of women in managerial positions, excuse me, for the most recent year with available data. So this chart includes many more countries, but unfortunately I had to cut off the image to fit it on my slide. But luckily you can see Ukraine there included among the countries with the highest proportion of women in managerial positions. So you can see on the right side of this screen that there are options to download this chart or to download the data behind the chart. And then the icons at the top of the screen give you the option to generate other types of charts, a line chart, to generate a map, or to download the full data set for more in-depth analysis. So you can see it's a very user-friendly interface, and it provides a snapshot of where countries stand for each SDG indicator, including several indicators that tell us about women and men in leadership positions. So to conclude, I'd like to invite you all to participate in our upcoming expert meeting on gender statistics, which will take place online on the 28th and 29th of September of this year. We will be disseminating more information about this event in the coming months, and we'd be very glad for you all to join us. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have later on in the Q&A or by email. You can see my email there on the screen. And you can find more information about all of the materials and initiatives that I've talked about today at the UNECE Gender Statistics website, which you can also see on the slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kristen, for your great presentation and for highlighting in such a comprehensive manner the gender statistics at UNECE.
And yes, we move on, and it is known that strengthening gender equality and expanding economic opportunities for women is part and parcel of the mandate of the United Nations Development Program. I would like to hand over to a representative of this agency, Yulia Golovanova, who is going to address the audience on behalf of the project, and who is going to talk to us about research being done by UNDP, men and women in leadership positions in Ukraine. Over to you, Yulia.
Добрий день.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me well. Elena, thank you for introducing me. I'm coordinator, advocacy coordinator, and public partner, private dialogue of UNDP, strengthening business communities for micro and medium-sized enterprises. Let me give you just a couple of highlights about the project. I understand that we have an audience interested in gender desegregated statistics and gender equality as a broad topic. Our project has a very sort of the title of the project is a bit of a mouthful. Let me explain what it stands for and how it ties in with researching gender statistics, and in particular, as we look into men and women in leadership positions. This is a project that is committed to promoting capacity across business associations that represent micro and small size enterprises. You probably appreciate that small businesses, they play a key role in the national economy, and we are helping promote both business associations and community associations that represent this particular segment of business in Ukraine. One of the key objectives is to promote women entrepreneurship in Ukraine and women entrepreneur associations that operate in Ukraine. And it is at the initiative of such a business association, you might have heard of the League of Professional Women of Ukraine. This is one of the most well-known and powerful women associations representing the women of Chernihiv. This is an all-Ukrainian association, and with the Help Out project, they have been able to scale up nationwide. And after the training course in open source data usage, they initiated a study to find out the share of women in this country in positions of leadership, running their own businesses, running companies, or heading up organizations or enterprises in this country. So we decided that we would commission that study together with the Ukrainian Societal Data Center. We we had a training course for those business associations, and they inquired into the share of women compared to men that lead organizations or run businesses. But as of that moment, it was back in 2017, we did not have data to rely on or draw from. And let me give you, by way of a disclaimer, I'm an advocacy expert. I'm very nervous now. I'm not an open source data expert, not a statistician, but I was in charge of this research project and using the findings of this research project. But it was very exciting. It was so creative, and our experts on open source data, they picked up the single state register of legal entities or proprietorships and civil society institutions, and they used the publicly available data published by the Ministry of Justice, and they used the endings of patronymics, so which are characteristically gender-based. This is how they disaggregated the data. In some cases, foreign names, non-Ukrainian names, were also analyzed. For instance, Tatar names or other ethnic names other than Ukrainian. And this was a research project, and I would like to present you the findings. And 3 years on, we launched the second phase of this project. And one of the first questions from our business associations, they wanted that original study to continue. They wanted a follow-up study to look back at the previous 3 years in terms of how the situation had evolved over this period of time and how it reflects the impact of the ongoing COVID pandemic. So they approached us and they requested that we follow up and repeat the same study. Let me share with you our findings in a presentation.
Що ж змінилося за цей час?
In terms of what's changed as of 2020 compared to the previous period, what I would like to indicate that this is as of August the 7th, 2020. Quite some time has elapsed since, and I understand that the situation has already evolved from that point. But this survey, that it still remains very relevant and insightful in terms of eliciting some of the major trends and how these trends have evolved, actually did evolve over this period between 2017 and 2020. As you can gather from this slide, it compares the total number of economic entities on the single public register increased by another 600,000, 2.5 million in 2017 versus 3.15 in 2020. You can also gather from this slide the share of women entrepreneurs, meaning sole traders, and the CEOs of legal entities. You can see this in red color. Those are women running legal entities. Now, I've been talking to you about the methodology that was used as part of this research project. I would like to now comment on what these data suggest, and bearing in mind that we did not get full access to the register, but gave us a sense of scale and helped us put this research into perspective. And we looked at company sizes, at their top lines, things like top lines and headcounts, with some of the items that we were not able to explore because we did not have access to that stratum of data. And also informal employment also was not captured by this study. Because we solely relied on publicly available national statistics. And there is another quite widespread phenomenon when people, individuals who actually work for a company, they go and get themselves registered as sole traders, while effectively they work for a company as employees. And that is also difficult to capture. Now, in terms of this overall picture and mainstream trends, that they have not changed. It's in terms of this headline gender balance, 59/41 something, while it's the 60/40 balance overall. But if we look at corporate entities versus sole traders, that's quite some variance. In sole traders, the shares are almost equal. When it comes to the leadership of legal entities, as you can gather, women represent a minority of only 30% in top management position and in CEO positions. Now, Kiev city, the national capital, is also, it plays in a league of its own, as you can imagine. Now we have this useful dimension of the number of active versus registered enterprises. So the total is over 300,000, but as 1.3, but it's only 200,000 of those registered in Kiev city are active. But this is a pretty striking difference compared to the national average. Kiev tends to have a much smaller share of women leading organizations. Among legal entities, it's as low as 31%. In Ukraine, 31%. In Kiev, it is as low as 28%. While in sole traders, the picture is more or less evenly balanced. In Kiev, specifically, it's 43% of leaders are women. Now, another insightful correlation is how this balance varies, comparing large metropolitan areas with rural communities. And here, when it comes to large cities, then again, in sole traders, the picture is more or less evenly balanced, men versus women. In legal entities, however, 70% of leadership positions are held by men, over a little shy of 30% of the total held by women. In rural areas, though, the share of women tends to be higher. In communities with 15,000 people, inhabitants, and fewer, we can see a higher number of women in positions of leadership, as high as 34%. Now, the next thrust is the types of activity or professions where women tend to claim a larger share. And one of the clear leaders is education, where women claim a larger share of the total. Another, it's actually very insightful because the data was used by the League of Business and Professional Women of Ukraine subsequent to this research project to embark on an advocacy campaign to promote business standards in those particular industries that are predominantly associated with women as leaders, such operations as beauty salons, and indeed mostly run by women, and elementary education. It is in these particular industries that a large-scale advocacy campaign was launched seeking to introduce standards, service standards, to promote a more balanced picture, and as a way of promoting women entrepreneurship too. Now, if we look at the QVED classification, which is a classification of industries, I would also like to share a reference to all those charts and graphs and maps. It's all available on the website of the Ukrainian Center of Public Data, where you can look at all these parameters and retrieve any data that you might be interested in. What I would also like to indicate is that this survey does not answer the question why. How come the situation is so markedly different in Kiev city versus small rural communities? This is an observation of the situation. It is above our pay grade to figure out why the situation is the way it is and what needs to be done to improve things. It is up to the next organization, think tanks, analysts. It is their job to draw meaningful conclusions from these raw data. What I would also like to indicate is there's a very interesting dimension when we compared 2020 with 2017, something that came as quite an eye-opener. While back in 2017, the most widespread among all types of business entities was the type of activity, retail trade. It's basically farmers markets. In 2020, the most popular industry was computer programming. And we felt elated and so proud of this country that our business community has evolved so dramatically towards information technologies. And retail trade now only comes third compared to 2017. Market, farmers markets. But we are talking specifically about sole proprietorships. We're not talking about corporate entities proper. We're talking about sole traders. Now, this is the most striking development. Now, if we look at education, it's also a very interesting picture and a very insightful correlation that the share of women is so much higher in those particular professions that the mostly the shorter the education period, the more women there are. So in elementary schools, in primary schools, we tend to see a much larger proportion of women. However, as we move into secondary and then higher education, this is where we are beginning to see a so much larger proportion of men in the leadership of those training institutions. This is also very insightful takeaway, something for analysts to drill down into. This visualization, what it shows is that it's indeed very meaningful in terms of the trends that it elicits and the regional variances that exist between the south of Ukraine versus the north of Ukraine, where the highest number of women tends to be found in the southeast of Ukraine. So you can see this map skewed in that particular respect. So it's another very interesting comparison is in retail trade. So I wouldn't like to take up too much of your time. Let me just quickly rush you through this visualization from which you can see those hubs of retail trade. Those are the large open air markets, one in Kharkiv, one in Khmelnytsky, one in Chernivtsi, where you can see the share of women being so much higher. Seventh Kilometer is indeed a very famous place in Ukraine. It's a very large wholesale market where over 70% of all outlets are run by women. Another interesting information, it's also available from public statistics because we have also religious organizations as part of the register. And we see this traditional stereotypical correlation where we speak about religious organizations. Men tend to play first fiddle there. And in particular, this is pronounced in Western Ukraine, which we can assume it is the most conservative part of the country, upholding traditional values. And it's only natural that men should claim over 90%, with women only in 2% of leadership roles. Now, if we look at this breakdown of sector versus size of community, it's an interesting correlation. While nationwide, women are better represented in some industries, but not in large metropolitan areas. While at the same time, on a national level, women may not be as well represented in certain areas nationwide, but they tend to have higher representation in smaller communities. Now, our experts also looked into average pay levels in women in leadership roles. As we can gather, in most industries, men tend to make more in average pay. Only one profession, administrative services, is where this is the only industry where women tend to make a little more than men. Now, this map is something that we can be proud of, and this was drawn from statistics of the Unec, and what it reflects is the share of women. In it's different in terms of what definitions may vary between our concept of sole proprietorship and the concept used in European statistics of self-employed. They are not completely identical. When we are talking about the leadership of employers, this is where we rank second only to Latvia. And this is indeed a breakthrough. This is something to be proud of, that in this country, women have such good representation compared to other European nations. Now, this is something that I commented on, all those interactive instruments that are available on our social data center and our maps, and also those materials are available in both languages on the website of the United Nations Development Program. And I would be really thrilled if other projects, other organizations use our data to gain a better insight into why we have such gender balances or other imbalances in women versus men in business, and how the data could be used to improve things in this country, to increase economic opportunities for women in promoting their careers in this country, and how to fight poverty, how to improve economic prosperity and well-being for women on the whole. Thank you for your attention. If I don't hear any questions, I'll be happy to hand over to the next speaker. Thank you, Yulia, for this very useful presentation. Let me congratulate you on the successful implementation of the project that you run. I'm happy to hand over to the next speaker, Ms. Drina Marchak, who's head of the Public Finance Research and Public Administration Research Center at the Kiev School of Economics. She's the Chief Operating Officer for Prozora Sales, the public procurement framework for sales. You have a wealth of experience in public administration. You've advised 2 ministers. You've taken an active part in reforming Ukraine's public administration framework. From your perspective as a practitioner, to what extent is gender equality relevant and crucial for Ukraine? Thank you for the opportunity of addressing a subject based on my gender, not as much based on my background. I apologize for any issues with the quality of my sound. I'm currently in Lviv at a forest management conference. It's not very convenient, but it also has a gender dimension to it too. What I would like to share with you is that it's hard for me to speak about public administrators. It's because I'm an administrator, but I work for a state-owned company. And this actually is, according to my experience, some trends in the public sector. The public sector is lagging behind in many respects. There is this continued prevalence of men, in particular in leadership roles at state-owned companies. But I'm particularly lucky because I wear 2 hats at the Kiev School of Economics, and also I work for the state-owned company that operates the public procurement system of Ukraine. But I'm not experienced any disadvantages because I'm a woman. But I think it's more of an issue of mindset. It's more of what really matters is it's actually merit-driven. It's competencies and qualifications, whether man or woman. They have an equal chance of succeeding in their job, as long as they can do the job, if they can communicate with clients and negotiate terms and things like that, and have a critical mindset and perseverance. At Prozora Sales, we never give up. It is one of our values is that we are very resilient and very perseverant, and it's also the ability of thinking outside of the box is what is really appreciated. But in some situations, I might have experienced that to be a woman in a leadership role is not the norm in Ukraine. And what I've been thinking about, what is the breaking point here? When is the new normal going to set in? So I think there are 2 things. One is industry, and 2 is age. These things actually drive those stereotypical attitudes. I currently work with several industries because Prozora Sales is a vehicle for public procurement and sales that promotes transparent stewardship of publicly owned assets. And I work with industries where women represent a very small minority. I'm currently, I'm going to be speaking at this a forestry forum, and we may have up to 5 women all in all in the entire audience at this conference. Some other industries may include railways, the National Railway Company, Ukrzaliznytsia, where though they suffer from a very small percentage of women, and in particular in leadership roles. And I've often found myself in a situation where I realize that it's a meeting of 10 or 20 people. I'm the only woman, and I'm the youngest person, the youngest participant in the event. And I believe that this situation in individual industries is indeed, it's quite to be expected. And in particular, in leadership roles at Ukrainian railways, at the Ukrainian motorway administration, it's the summit of their long career path. They started out in forestry, I don't know, as fellas something, and it's like they often in this sector they think that you need to learn to fell the trees first before you take up a position of leadership. So it's mainly also part of the stereotype is whether a certain trade or a certain profession needs brute physical force. In banks, in insurance companies, in education, it is a markedly different situation. We have quite a large proportion of women at the Ministry of Finance, at the Ministry of Health. But when we speak about those predominantly male professions, normally understood to have a very large element of physical strain, physical work. This is where we tend to see so much larger proportion of men in leadership. The other factor is age. The older the person that you are talking to, the more propensity for men to engage with men, for women with women. It's not any kind of ageism or something, but it's a matter of traditions. It's how the person's character was built. And from what I can see, that young people aged under 45, they have no problem talking to men versus women, no problem at all. But people aged 50 plus, it feels those people sort of traditionally, they are more accustomed to seeing a man as their opposite number or their counterparty. And it's indeed a humbling experience to feel to be the only woman at a large forum, at a large gathering. And it's sometimes it's an emotional experience, but I don't have a problem with that. It's not that I feel uncomfortable or anything. I feel comfortable interacting with any counterpart, regardless of gender or age. At the same time, I've come across, in experience, some difficult situations where it's been a disadvantage to be a woman at work in acting as an administrator, as a manager. And I'm afraid the Darina has a very poor line. She keeps cutting in and out. So when I worked for the Secretariat of the Cabinet of Ministers, working on the public administration reform, in meetings, often women spoke, but nobody cared what they had to say. It was a very unpleasant experience, but the same number of men and women in a room, and it's like a woman says something and everyone ignores her, but then a man takes the floor and pretty much expresses the same thought, and everyone welcomes that or heeds that. So it's actually something that I noticed, and then I sat down with some of my female colleagues, and we started trying to wrap our brains around it. What was the root cause of that? Lost her again. And it's actually this culture of ignoring women is something that came from the top, from our first person who was a woman herself, by the way. So it's actually, and then there is this stereotype that the more gray hair, the smarter the person is. So it's actually, she would always listen to men more willingly than to women, in particular older men. And while during my time there, no woman was ever promoted, only men were. And during this time, I think that this serves as a really spectacular example of gender inequality. But I think that the root cause, wasn't the men. They were not the problem. It was the tone at the top. The first person who was a woman, she was actually imposing that stereotype. And it's from my experience with experiencing this is if a woman considers herself to be equal as a counterpart to when engaging with a man in her work processes, that this is how she's going to be taken by everyone. But if she proceeds from an inferior position, if she feels inferior, this is what men sense. This is what gives them this absolutely unwarranted emotional advantage vis-a-vis women. This is what I experienced myself during my time at the Public Administration Reform Office. These are some of the biggest takeaways on this score. I'll be happy to continue discussing this with colleagues. I'm happy to have had this opportunity of sharing my experience. Thank you, Darina. Thank you for finding the time to share your valuable experience. My dear participants, now we move on to the last item of our agenda, questions and answers and discussion. I would like to begin by sharing some comments and questions provided by the participants at registration. Gender equality is both relevant and important as part of Ukraine's EU integration. Which countries, in terms of their experience of the EU, could be replicated or borrowed by Ukraine with adaptation? Which EU countries in mainstreaming gender equality are the best source of experience for Ukraine to borrow or replicate?
Давайте я, мабуть, розпочну.
Yes, let me begin. I hope our international colleagues will maybe put more flesh on the bones. The State Statistics Office is happy to implement best practices, not only from our European peers, and we are interested in, there's a project underway with the Statistics Office of Norway, and we are learning our colleagues' experience from Norway, not only in terms of in other statistics, but also in the register statistical units. and how they have worked to introduce gender disaggregation. So based on this project, we are working now. We now have a great opportunity of really gaining this useful experience firsthand. I look forward to hearing from my other colleagues, but let me remind you that Ukraine has signed an EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. Under the terms of the agreement, there is a dedicated chapter entitled Statistics, Article 355, 359, and they impose obligations on Ukraine in the area of statistics, and this includes the transposition of relevant EU regulations. The State Statistics Service of Ukraine is working to implement all relevant EU regulations across all areas of statistics concerned into our day-to-day operations. If a certain EU regulation provides for gender disaggregation, we will comply with that, and we will implement gender disaggregation across those particular types of statistical observations. And I look forward to hearing from our international colleagues if they have anything to say on the matter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Kristen, would you please also provide your response to this question, if you don't mind? A little piece of advice.
Of course, I'd be happy to. Well, I have to say that from what I've seen during today's presentations, I would be pointing people to the Ukraine as an example of best practices in gender statistics and measuring the representation of men and women in leadership roles. But we have many resources available through UNECE that provides examples of best practices in the composition and dissemination of gender statistics. I'll put something in the chat. It is a link to a repository of best practices in communicating gender statistics that I think shows not only kind of innovations in communication of gender statistics, but when you look at those resources, you can see obviously best practices in the collection of those gender statistics as well. But I think many countries in the EU and across the ECE region have made incredible progress in the last few years. Most countries in the region have gender databases. Most countries have publications, women and men publications. So there are really many places you can look to for, inspiration. But I think what we've seen today has been really impressive, and I will be sure to share the work that's going on here as a best practice in other arenas. So thank you.
Дуже дякую вам, Крістен, за ваше запитання. А ми переходимо
Thank you, Kristen. Now, we have many questions asked on our Facebook page, and here in Zoom, it's quite an active discussion. I'm happy that this is such an interesting topic. What is the impact of gender disaggregation in the registered statistical units on improving the quality of the data contained in the registered statistical units? Over to you, Ms. Vlasenko. This is an interesting question indeed. In terms of the structure of the universe of statistical units, it's this additional dimension will only improve the quality of data going forward. Thank you. Now, to what extent could gender desegregation improve and strengthen business associations for small, medium-sized enterprises? Tatiana, would you like to take up the question? To what extent is gender desegregation going to strengthen the capacity of business associations of small, medium-sized enterprises? This is something worth researching. This is a brand new initiative. Yeah, absolutely. We need to inquire into this. Thank you. Next question. What is the root cause of the imbalance between individual regions? Okay, you see, all those surveys that we've conducted to date, they mostly are geared towards gaining a better understanding into what the actual state of affairs is. Now, we have this lay of the land in front of us, and now analysts should come on board and verify those various hypotheses. And social science, many such hypotheses already exist that need verifying whether they apply to Ukraine. And I would like to express my appreciation to the State Statistics Service of Ukraine that they've worked hard to provide a basis, a database to verify those hypotheses. Let me join in addressing this question. Natalia's presentation had a slide on sole proprietors and women as sole proprietors. It is quite insightful. There's a large number of sole proprietorships in Khmelnytsky province and the south of Ukraine, run by women, in Kherson and Mykolaiv in Odessa. And without a doubt, I fully concur with Tatiana that this is something that warrants further research. Analysts should come on board and inquire into the reasons why there's such a high proportion of women in leadership roles, in sole proprietorships, in those particular parts of the country. But there is a very simple assumption that I would like to suggest, that both in Khmelnytsky and in Odessa, we have those very large wholesale markets, open air markets. And we know that in retail trade indeed leads the pack in terms of the number of women in leadership roles. And it's probably skewed in those particular parts of the country because of the presence of those large points of gravity. Why these provinces? Why there's a markedly lower share of women in leadership roles at companies and at legal entities in Western Ukraine, for instance, in Lviv in particular, compared to a much better picture in the neighboring provinces of Lutsk and Rivne. This certainly does warrant additional research and dedicated statistical observations. We probably will not find the answer to this question. We can only make assumptions at this point. Thank you, Igor Evgenievich. My dear hosts, we have questions about what kind of advice could our national experts provide to our Ukrainian participants about mainstreaming Genesis. It's actually been answered. I suggest that this be shared via our chat box here in Zoom and on Facebook. Let me know when you're ready with that. Now.
Цікавить повний перелік критеріїв активності
The full list of activity criteria for a legal entity as used by the National Statistics Office of Ukraine. The full list of activity criteria. This full list can be found in our methodologies available on our website. You might as well contact us by making an official inquiry. What is really the big ones? Total head count, taxpayer attributes, and we also look at company activity in filing statistical returns and taking part in statistical observations, which is actually, these are some of the primary attributes that the State Statistics Office of Ukraine uses when measuring economic activity. Those are the main ones. But if you would like to receive the full list of those indicators, then I understand we have questions. Question from our colleague regarding the how appropriate it is for this national statistical authorities to use the term gender. I understand that in official correspondence, it's the presentation had, and in some of the draft policies, the term was gender attribute. And it's, then again, this is a work in progress. It's not, this policy is still being written. But there will still be several rounds of consultations, and then all the terms will be verified, and they will use the appropriate term gender attribute. I hope I've answered the question, and this term that was used here was not the appropriate term in one of the presentations. Thank you. We had a question and a comment from the leader of the NGO Human Decency, and he focuses on the term gender equality, but it's actually, we are running behind our schedule. So can you also discuss the term gender equality and where it draws its basis for use as a term? So, and dear host, let me know when when we're going to be sharing those links, because we've been sharing those useful links via the Zoom chat box, but not on Facebook. Let me know when this also becomes available to those following us on Facebook. I answer this question in the chat box. The first basic policy is the Gender Equality Act, and Article 1 provides terms and definitions and where the term gender equality is defined. And the second source is the resolution of December 2020 to gather gender equality data. It is based on this policy that the State Statistical Office of Ukraine is currently collecting data across all attributes of gender equality that were mentioned in that policy. And as soon as we've gathered all that information, we also be producing a statistical manual, and we will be happy to invite you all to a presentation which should be held sometime in the late autumn, early winter. Thank you, Mr. Werner.
вивантажили посилання.
My dear
Можете переходити і дивитись.
participants, now you can also collect those links from our Facebook page. Next question is it possible to assess the performance of companies based on the gender of their chief executive officers? Is there a way to assess business performance by using the gender of their CEOs? This would be an interesting study, and the State Statistics Service of Ukraine has taken its first step towards it. But to have a solid observation to verify those assumptions, we need to work with microdata, and we unfortunately don't have, at the State Statistical Service, we don't have the opportunity of providing microdata to users. This would require changes to be made to the National Statistics Act of Ukraine to enable the National Statistics Service of Ukraine to have instruments to share microdata. And there are several tools that Eurostat and other agencies are suggesting, but unfortunately there's this problem, and we are working on it, and our expert council under the State Statistics Service of Ukraine, and the service itself has been advocating quite strongly for this law quite some time. And if UNDP joins forces with us, this should probably accelerate things. Thank you, Tatiana. Any more contributions on this subject? If I may, it's so what do we mean by performance? Because we should agree on our terms. How are we going to measure this? Are we going to measure it by earnings or some other yardstick? So we need a more clear-cut definition of what actually represents performance. And it's in those sensitive research initiatives, I would very like us to agree up front what it is we're going to inquire into, because performance is a very broad concept. And how it is going to be disaggregated into several individual attributes. We need to get clarity on the terms that we use. Thank you. Just our participants are asking for a reminder of legal entities by size, or if you could direct them to where they could find this on your website. We have definitions in the law on how to measure the size of companies, and you can refer to the law. Also, there is a classification for the purposes of statistical compliance, and I suggest you file an inquiry with the State Statistics Service of Ukraine, and we would apply both criteria to classify companies by size. Thank you. Indeed, this is a very useful topic, and we would like to continue discussing it, but unfortunately, our time is up. Actually, we ran over our time by 10 minutes already. I would like to thank all our panelists for your useful and insightful and exciting presentations and contributions for this very lively discussion in our chat that still continues, and for the time that you carved out of your busy schedules to join the Zoom call, and for following us on Facebook. I would also like to remind you that a video of this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel in 2 languages, Ukrainian and English. A web page has been created where English language videos will be posted to, and this is a sign of our commitment to promoting sustainable development goals. And I would like to thank you for your useful contributions. Have a great day. Let's keep in touch.